So today we're going to learn about absolute value inequalities. And so it's very similar to equations, except you'll have a less than or a greater than sign instead of an equal sign. So the first example is, what are the solutions to the absolute value of x is less than 5? So basically you're looking for all the values that x could be where the distance would be less than 5 away from 0. So the solution is all of these numbers between -5 and 5. Like if we would look at -4, that's 4 ticky marks away, that's less than 5. If we look at +2, that's only 2 ticky marks away, that's less than 5. So every single number between -5 and 5 works. So the solution is that answer right there. So our steps, it starts off the same way. What you first do is you isolate the abs, just like last video. So I would subtract 5 on both sides, and I get x minus 2 is less than 5. Step 2 is you make two equations. So you ignore the inequality for right now, and you do just like we did, set it equal to 5 and -5. Step 3 is to solve both equations. So I add 2, x equals 7, and x equaling -3. So this is where it gets different. What you do is, then I will give you a number line, and what you have to do is you have to fill in the number line. And whenever you put the dots in the number line, you're going to use an open dot whenever the sign is less than or greater than. And you're going to do a closed dot whenever the sign is less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. So the difference is the fact that there is the line underneath. That's what makes it a closed dot. All right, so for in this case, if we look at the original inequality, it does not have the line underneath it, so I'm going to put an open dot on -3 and 7. Step 5, what you do is you have to check, but this time you have to check a number between the two solutions. And you have to remember to use the original inequality. So before we would check the 7 and the -3, but now you pick any number in between -3 and 7. Doesn't matter which number, you might choose something differently than me. A lot of times I choose 0, but in this case, since I have 2 written out on my number line, I'm going to use 2. So I'm going to go back to my original inequality right here, and I'm going to plug 2 in. And so I can go and grab my calculator. And I'm going to plug it in. So second 0, and I get 5. And so I know that 5 isn't 10, but what you have to ask yourself is this a true statement? So I ask myself right here, is that a true statement? And it is, because 5 is less than 10. Okay. If it is a true statement, what you do is you shade in between the two numbers, because that means if the 2 worked, it needed to be shaded over. If the 2 did not work, what you would do is shade in the opposite direction. The last step is you write your inequality answer. So the number line is half your points, so that's half your points. And then writing your inequality is the other half. So if this is shaded in, this is how you write it if it's shaded inside in between the two dots. What you do is you put the smaller number, or the smaller answer, then you do less than x and less than the bigger number. And your inequalities will always face that way as long as you put the smaller number first. So in this case, my smaller answer was -3. I do less than x, less than, and my bigger answer was 7. So that is the other half of points. Now if they are shaded out, and I'm going to show you that in the next problem, what you do is you write two separate inequalities. So for the next one, I need to isolate the absolute value first. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. And then I'm going to divide by this 4. So I reduced the 2 divided by 4 and got 1/2. So now that I have the absolute value alone, I'm going to make 2 separate inequalities. So I'm going to set what's inside the 2 lines equal to positive 1/2 and set it equal to negative 1/2. And then there's no more solving I have to do because the only thing that was inside the 2 absolute value symbols is just the variable. So then after I have solved my 2 equations, I fill in the number line. So I put just 2 little ticky marks. I'm going to put negative 1/2 and 1/2. This time, since there is that line underneath the greater than symbol, that means I'm going to be putting a big closed dot on both of these. So then what I do is I pick any number in between. So probably the easiest number is to pick 0. And I'm going to plug it in to my original inequality. So I'm going to write it out like this. So you can either use your head or you can go to your calculator. And I type in 4, and the absolute value symbols, 0, plus 3 on the outside. Remember, we're not trying to get the number. We're not trying to get 5. What I got was 3. And I asked myself, is that a true statement? Is 3 greater than 5? It is not. So since it's not greater than 5, I'm not going to shade over the 0. I'm going to shade everything except for the 0. So then how you write your answers, that's half the points. When they are separate, what you do is write 2 different inequalities. So I do x, and I put the number, and then I just ask myself, is this line shading everything less than or greater than negative 1/2? And what it's doing is shading everything less than or equal to negative 1/2. Then I do the same thing over here. I write the x, I write the number, and I ask myself, is this shading everything less than or greater than 1/2? And shading everything greater than. And then you just put a little or in between it. If you're not very good at inequalities, whatever way the arrow is facing, so the arrow is facing in this direction, so notice my inequality is facing in the same direction. Same with this, my arrow is facing in this direction, and my inequality is facing in that same direction. All right, the next one. The first thing I need to do is get rid of the 7 before I can make my 2 equations. So multiply by 7, that gets rid of it. So I now have 4m plus 1 equals 7, and 4m plus 1 equals negative 7. So then I solve both of these. So I have 4m equaling 6, and I have 4m equaling negative 8. So m in this case, 6 divided by 4 reduces to 3/2. And this one, when I do negative 8 divided by 4, I get negative 2. So now I put this on my number line, negative 2 on this side, 3/2 on this side. It has the line underneath it, so that means I'm going to be doing a closed dot. I pick any number in between it. Again, I'm going to just pick 0, because that's my favorite one that I like to pick. So I plug it into my original equation. So I start off with the absolute value symbols. I get out of the absolute value symbol, and then I divide by 7. I get that gross decimal, so 0.14. So I ask myself, is 0.14 less than or equal to 1? And it is. So that means I shade in between. Okay. If it's shaded in between, I write the smaller number, less than x, less than the bigger number. And notice I put the lines underneath it because they were closed dots. All right, the last one. I'm going to first add the 4 over and divide by 2. So I have x plus 1 equaling 3, and I have x plus 1 equaling negative 3. I solve both of these by subtracting 1 on both sides. I get 2, and I get negative 4. I put a closed dot again on them because of the line underneath. I pick any number. How about I pick something different this time, like 1? So I'm going to plug 1 in. I'm going to grab my calculator. I get 0. I ask myself, is that a true statement? Is 0 less than 2? It is. So I'm going to connect these again. And then I write the smaller number less than x less than the bigger number.